What did the king of Israel do for the Shunammite woman, and why? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 2 Kings on walking through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
Today we're going to be discussing 2 Kings chapter 8, verses 1 to 6. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 2 Kings chapter 8, verse 1. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 2 Kings chapter 8, beginning at verse 1. Then Elisha spoke to the woman whose son he had restored to life, saying, Arise and go, you and your household, and stay wherever you can, for the Lord has called for a famine, and furthermore it will come upon the land for 7 years. So the woman arose and did according to the saying of the man of God. And she went with her household and dwelt in the land of the Philistines 7 years. It came to pass at the end of 7 years that the woman returned from the land of the Philistines. And she went to make an appeal to the king for her house and for her land. Then the king talked with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, Tell me, please, all the great things Elisha has done. Now it happened, as he was telling the king how he had restored the dead to life, that there was the woman whose son he had restored to life, appealing to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi said, My lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. And when the king asked the woman, she told him. So the king appointed a certain officer for her, saying, Restore all that was hers, and all the proceeds of the field from the day that she left the land until now. As we have said numerous times in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament, events are not always given to us in chronological order. Sometimes they're organized into sections or themes that might not always be intuitive to us, but was to the author at the time. In chapter 4, we got a lot of Elisha's early miracles to show he was a man of God. In chapters 5, 6, and 7, we got some more miracles that Elisha performed, but also had narratives concerning the Syrians, not only with Naaman the leper, but also with the Syrian raids and the siege of Samaria. In chapter 8 now, the author of 2 Kings returns to the Shunammite woman that we met back in chapter 4, the one whose son was raised from the dead by Elisha. If you recall in that lesson, we said that we didn't know the length of time between the birth of the child and the time he died and was raised from the dead, for chapter 4 did not say. Because of that, we ventured a guess that the child could be anywhere between 4 and 10 due to the fact that the child could accompany his father in the field. However, if we are to assume that the king Gehazi is talking to in verse 4 is still Jehoram and not the next king, which is Jehu, we indeed narrow that timeline down a little. Recall from chapter 3 that Jehoram reigned in Israel for 12 years. The famine that Elisha mentions to the Shunammite woman would last for 7 years, leaving us with 5 years left in Jehoram's reign. Now, we could very well be in the final year of Jehoram's reign here, so that would tell us that the boy could at most be 5 when he died and was raised from the dead, with it most likely being 4 due to the fact that the Shunammite woman would have needed 9 months to give birth. This assumption, though, lays entirely on the king of this section of the chapter being Jehoram and not Jehu. And that assumption does have its pros and cons. In favor is the fact that there was a famine in the days of Jehoram, not only at the end of chapter 4, but also in chapter 7. The famine in chapter 4 seemed to affect all of Israel, while the famine in chapter 7 could have been confined to Samaria alone. If the famine mentioned by Elisha to the Shunammite woman is the one of chapter 4, then of course that would fit in the timeline easily. If it was some other famine, though, then it could push us into the reign of Jehu. The con of this being Jehoram, is the king's conversation with Gehazi, which is that he wanted to know all the great things that Elisha had done. Jehoram knew Elisha quite well, and by this point in his reign, he would have seen or heard of most of Elisha's miracles, though maybe not all of them. Jehu, though, was not the son of Jehoram. He was not even from the king's family, and so it wouldn't be surprising at all if he didn't know of Elisha's exploits and wanted to learn about them. So is this more likely to be Jehoram or Jehu? Well, in our study of the kings so far, only once has a new king been introduced without first telling us about the death of the previous king, and that was Baasha, the king right after Nadab in Israel. That means if we follow the typical pattern of 1st and 2nd Kings so far, this would be Jehoram. However, since Baasha does break this rule, we cannot say 100% that the writer didn't break this rule here too. In reality, it doesn't matter which king we're talking about, it just matters what he did, so we're going to leave our discussion on the matter at that. As we said earlier, Elisha told the Shunammite woman that a famine was being sent by the Lord and that she needed to go where she could in order to survive it. You see, even though the woman and her family seemed to have means, this famine would be devastating, and so as a kindness to how this woman had fed him, Elisha was going to ensure that she was fed. So it was that the woman and her family left their home and dwelt in the land of the Philistines. But by doing this, it could have made it appear that she had abandoned her home, for when she returned, she needed to plead with the king to have it returned to her. The king of Israel, having heard of all the great things that Elisha had done, including with this woman's son, who he now got to meet, when he heard this plea, he appointed a certain officer to ensure that her land was restored. In this, the king of Israel acted justly, and the woman received her land back. If this king of Israel wasn't Jehoram, then in the next lesson, the writer of 1 Kings will bring us back to that timeline to deal with an event that occurred in the final years of Jehoram's reign, the death of Ben-Hadad of Syria. We hope you'll return for that discussion. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 2 Kings chapter 8, verses 7 to 15, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.